It was a bright and sunny morning, and the city was already buzzing with life. The sound of cars, footsteps, and chatter filled the streets. People were rushing to work, children were laughing on their way to school, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the air from nearby bakeries. Among all this everyday noise stood one of the most famous restaurants in town, Le Soleil. It was a beautiful place with golden letters shining above its door and glass windows that sparkled in the morning light. Inside, everything was perfectly arranged: clean tables, polished glasses, and flowers neatly placed in small vases. In the middle of this perfection stood Chef Marco, the heart and soul of the restaurant. He was a tall man in his late 40s, known for his serious face and sharp eyes. He had worked in kitchens his whole life, and had earned a big name for his amazing cooking skills. But Marco was not an easy man to please. He wanted everything done exactly his way. His staff respected him but also feared him. One wrong move, one burnt dish, or one late plate, and Marco's loud voice would echo through the kitchen. That morning, the kitchen was full of energy. Pots were clanging, pans were sizzling, and the smell of garlic and butter filled the air. The team was preparing for the lunch rush, which was always the busiest time of the day. Waiters moved quickly between tables, checking if everything was ready. The chefs worked with focused faces, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and tasting soups. It was like a perfectly timed dance where everyone knew their step. Marco walked around the kitchen with his arms crossed, inspecting everything like a general watching his soldiers. "Taste the sauce again," he ordered one cook. "Too much salt in the soup," he shouted to another. He wasn't trying to be mean, he just wanted perfection. Le Soleil's reputation depended on it. People came from far away just to taste his food, and Marco wanted every dish to be flawless. Outside the kitchen, in the quiet corner near the entrance, stood a woman. Her name was Anna. She looked around nervously, holding a small, worn-out handbag in her hands. She was simple, wearing a plain blue dress, her hair tied back, and her shoes slightly dusty from walking. She wasn't rich or fancy, and she didn't look like she belonged in such a grand place. But her eyes carried warmth and kindness, and there was a calmness in the way she stood. Anna had come to the restaurant looking for a job. She had seen a small notice outside that said, "Now hiring, waitress." She thought maybe if she was lucky she could get the job. She wasn't expecting much, just a chance to earn a little money and start fresh. It had been a long time since she had worked. Life had been hard lately. Her husband had passed away years ago, and her small-town diner had closed down. She had moved to the city hoping for new beginnings, but the city wasn't easy for someone like her. She stood quietly, waiting for someone to notice her. Around her, the restaurant buzzed with activity. No one seemed to pay attention to the woman standing by the door. She watched the chefs move so quickly, and wondered how they could work in such a rush. The smell of food reminded her of the days when she used to cook for people back in her diner. Warm soups, homemade bread, simple meals that made people smile. She missed those days deeply. Finally, a young waiter named Leo noticed her and walked over. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked politely. Anna smiled softly. "Yes, dear. I saw your sign outside. I'm here to apply for the waitress job." Leo nodded and told her to wait for the manager. When the manager, a tall woman named Clara, came out, she looked Anna up and down. Clara wasn't unkind, but she was used to seeing people with polished shoes and crisp uniforms. "You have experience?" she asked. "Yes," Anna said. "I used to run a small diner with my husband. I cooked, served, and cleaned. I can do anything needed." Clara gave a polite smile but didn't seem convinced. "We'll see," she said, and told Anna to wait. Just then, Chef Marco walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. His sharp eyes scanned the room and they landed on Anna. "Who is this?" he asked. "She's here for the waitress job," Clara replied. Marco raised an eyebrow. He looked at Anna from head to toe. "A waitress, huh?" he said with a smirk. "This isn't a small-town cafe, you know. This is Le Soleil." Anna simply nodded. "I understand, sir," she said softly. Marco's tone was teasing, not cruel, but it carried pride. Can you even carry 3 plates at once? He asked, chuckling. Some of the staff laughed quietly. Anna smiled shyly. I can try, she replied. For a moment, Marco studied her. The plain woman with calm eyes who didn't seem offended or nervous. Something about her simplicity amused him. He turned to his staff and said jokingly, maybe she can cook too. Maybe we should let her make today's special. The kitchen erupted in laughter. Anna didn't say anything. She just smiled again, that same quiet, patient smile. She had heard laughter like this before, from people who didn't know her story, her struggles, or her strength. She didn't take it to heart. And as the morning went on, no one in that busy restaurant knew that this quiet, simple woman standing by the door would soon change everything and leave the entire place speechless. Chef Marco had always been the center of attention in the restaurant. His voice carried power, his words were commands, and no one dared to question him. That morning everything was running smoothly, too smoothly perhaps, and he was in one of his playful moods, the kind that often made others nervous. Anna was still standing quietly near the kitchen entrance, her hands folded politely in front of her. She looked humble, almost fragile, but there was something in her eyes, a calm strength, a quiet confidence that didn't fit her shy smile. Most people would have fidgeted under Marco's intense gaze, but Anna didn't. She simply waited, like a student waiting for a teacher's next question. Marco looked at her again, amused. So, you want to be a waitress? He asked, his voice loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear. Yes, sir, Anna replied softly. He tilted his head, pretending to think. Tell me, have you ever worked in a restaurant like this before? She shook her head gently. No, sir, but I've run a small diner before. I did everything. Myself, cooking, cleaning, serving. That answer made a few of the younger cooks snicker. To them, a small diner sounded like child's play compared to the fine dining world of Le Soleil. Marco smirked, not out of cruelty but curiosity. He liked to test people, to see what they were made of. A small diner, huh? He repeated. So you must be quite the chef then. Oh no, Anna said quickly. I just cook simple meals, nothing special. That line, nothing special, caught Marco's attention. He leaned forward slightly and said in a teasing tone, Nothing special? Well, maybe you should show us what your nothing special looks like. The kitchen staff laughed again. Everyone thought it was a joke, just one of those light moments before the lunch rush. No one expected her to take it seriously, but Anna didn't laugh. She looked at Marco for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then in the most polite voice she asked, Would you like me to? The laughter stopped. A few heads turned. Marco blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected her to respond that way. You mean, you actually want to cook? He asked, raising an eyebrow. If you don't mind, sir, she said softly. Maybe I could try. The kitchen went silent. For a few seconds, all that could be heard was the sound of sizzling pans and the faint bubbling of sauce. Marco glanced around at his staff, and they all exchanged amused glances. It was absurd, a random woman off the street wanting to cook in one of the city's top restaurants. Finally, Marco chuckled and shrugged. All right then, he said. Let's see what you've got. He tossed her an apron. There's the counter, there's the stove, and the ingredients are right there. Cook whatever you like. Anna caught the apron and smiled softly, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Thank you, sir, she said simply. The other chefs moved aside, whispering among themselves. This is going to be interesting, one of them murmured. She's going to burn the kitchen down. Another laughed quietly. Let's hope the fire extinguisher works. But Anna ignored them. She walked up to the counter, tied the apron around her waist, and looked around the kitchen with a gentle, familiar gaze. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes scanned the shelves, recognizing the spices, the herbs, the vegetables, like old friends she hadn't seen in years. Marco leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, a small smirk playing on his lips. He wasn't trying to be mean. Part of him was genuinely curious. There was something oddly calm about this woman. She didn't look scared, embarrassed, or even nervous. It was as if she belonged there, even though she clearly didn't. Anna began to work quietly. She picked up some fresh vegetables, washed them carefully, and started chopping them with smooth, confident movements. The sound of the knife against the board was steady, rhythmic, not rushed, not clumsy. It caught Marco's attention. The chefs watched closely now, their laughter fading into silence. They expected hesitation, confusion, maybe even panic, but there was none. Her hands moved like they had done this 1,000 times. She didn't need to measure or check recipes. She just knew. Within minutes, the air was filled with the smell of sautéed onions, garlic, and butter. The fragrance was comforting, homely, so different from the sharp, complex aromas that usually filled the restaurant. It was simple, yes, but it carried something special. Warmth. Marco found himself watching her more seriously now. The smirk had disappeared. Something about the way she stirred the pan, the way she tasted the sauce and adjusted it with a touch of salt. It was art without arrogance. The other cooks stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh or admire. Leo, the young waiter who had spoken to her earlier, whispered to a colleague, "She's actually good." Marco didn't say a word. He just observed quietly, his mind slowly shifting from amusement to respect. When Anna finally turned off the stove and began plating the dish, there was a strange silence in the kitchen. She moved gracefully, not rushing, not showing off. She placed the plate gently on the counter and looked up. "It's ready," she said softly. Marco looked at the plate. Simple, neat, elegant. It wasn't decorated like the fancy dishes his restaurant served, but something about it and the colors, the aroma, made him pause. For the first time in years, Chef Marco didn't know what to say, and as everyone leaned in, waiting for him to take the first bite, no one realized that this small, humble moment, later born from a joke, was about to change everything. For a moment, no one in the restaurant spoke. The air was heavy with the smell of Anna's cooking, warm, rich, and comforting. Even the sound of sizzling pans seemed to fade. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the plate sitting on the counter, small and simple, yet somehow glowing with life. Chef Marco stood there, arms crossed, trying to hide his curiosity. He had seen hundreds of cooks work under pressure, trained chefs, talented apprentices, people with fancy culinary degrees, but this was different. This woman hadn't hesitated once. She hadn't asked a single question. She had simply cooked, calmly, naturally, as if the kitchen had been her home all along. "Are you done?" Marco finally asked, trying to sound unimpressed. "Yes, sir," Anna replied, her voice steady but gentle. She untied her apron and placed it neatly on the counter. "It's ready." Marco walked forward slowly. The entire staff watched as he lifted a fork and took a small bite. The moment the food touched his tongue, his expression changed. Just slightly, but enough for everyone to notice. His brow softened, his eyes widened for a second, and then he set the fork down carefully. No one dared to speak. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "It's something simple," Anna said. "A recipe my mother taught me when I was a little girl. We used to make it on Sundays after church. It's not fancy and just real food." Marco blinked, then looked down at the dish again. It was nothing extravagant. A small portion of seasoned vegetables cooked in a creamy sauce, topped with fresh herbs and served with warm bread. But the taste was something else entirely. It wasn't the kind of luxury flavor that impressed critics. It was comforting, human, full of emotion. "Who taught you to cook like this?" Marco asked, still trying to sound in control. "My mother," she answered simply, "and then later my customers. They told me what they loved, and I learned from them." A few of the cooks exchanged uneasy glances. The room felt different now. The laughter from earlier had completely disappeared. Even Leo, the waiter who had been quietly watching from the side, felt a strange pride for her, as if he had known her for years. Marco stepped back, trying to regain his usual authority. "You know," he said slowly, "you were supposed to be applying for a waitress job, not trying to take mine." Anna smiled softly. "I wasn't trying to, sir. You asked me to cook." Her words weren't defensive. They were calm, respectful, and yet they carried quiet power. Everyone felt it. The restaurant manager, Clara, who had been watching from the door, spoke up nervously.
Chef, should I?
Ask her to leave? Marco didn't respond right away. He looked at the plate again, then at Anna. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of his younger self. The hunger to be seen, to be heard, to prove something without saying much. Finally he said, "No, let her stay for a while." The kitchen erupted in whispers. No outsider had ever been allowed behind those counters, let alone told to stay. The cooks looked confused, even threatened. But Marco ignored them. He turned to Anna again. "You worked in a diner, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir. For 12 years. Why did you stop?" Anna hesitated. Her hands tightened slightly around her handbag. "It closed down," she said quietly. "After my husband passed away, I couldn't keep it running. I came here to start over." Her voice was calm, but there was a heaviness in it, the kind that only life could create. Marco didn't respond. He just nodded once, then said, "Well, you've certainly started something." Anna didn't quite understand what he meant, but she smiled gratefully. "Thank you, sir." As the lunch rush began, Marco surprised everyone again. He told Anna to stay in the kitchen and help prepare a few side dishes. "Let's see if your magic works twice," he said with a faint grin. Anna nodded, washed her hands, and quietly got to work. There was no pride or arrogance in her movements, just quiet dedication. She cut, stirred, tasted, and adjusted flavors like she was painting a memory. The other chefs couldn't help but watch. Her cooking wasn't fancy or technical, but it felt alive. When the first plates went out to the dining room, the waiters returned with astonished faces. "Chef," one of them said, "the customers are asking about the new side dish. They say it tastes incredible." Marco raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Deep down, though, something stirred inside him, admiration mixed with humility. Anna continued working silently, unaware that she had just impressed one of the toughest chefs in the business. To her, it wasn't about showing off. It was about doing something she loved, something she thought she had lost forever. By the time the rush was over, Marco found himself watching her again, this time not as a critic, but as a believer. There was something special about her, something that couldn't be learned in a culinary school or written in a cookbook. It came from the heart, and as she wiped her hands and smiled faintly, Marco said to himself almost in a whisper, "Maybe talent really does hide in the most unexpected places." That afternoon, the restaurant that prided itself on perfection witnessed something far greater: sincerity. And none of them, not even Marco, could have guessed that this was just the beginning of a story that would change them all. The kitchen at Le Soleil had never been this quiet. Usually it was a storm of noise, sizzling pans, clattering plates, and shouting orders bouncing off the walls. But now something had changed. The noise had softened into a strange kind of stillness. It wasn't empty. It was focused. At the center of that stillness stood Anna. She was not rushing or trying to impress anyone. Her movements were gentle yet sure, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before, not for fame, not for money, but out of love. Her hands seemed to know what to do before her mind even told them. The way she sliced vegetables, stirred sauces, and adjusted spices. Everything flowed naturally, as if music was playing only she could hear. Chef Marco watched her from a distance, pretending to check on other dishes, but his eyes kept returning to her. He couldn't help it. There was something hypnotic about her calmness. Most cooks in his kitchen worked with pressure in their veins, chasing perfection, fearing mistakes. But Anna worked differently. She wasn't chasing perfection. She was feeling it. Leo, the young waiter, leaned close to another chef and whispered, "Look at her. She's not even breaking a sweat." The other chef nodded. "Yeah, it's weird. It's like she belongs here." Anna didn't notice them. Her world had shrunk to the chopping board, the pan, and the quiet rhythm of her breath. She hummed softly under her breath, an old tune she used to sing while cooking at her diner. It was the sound of home, warm, peaceful, and full of forgotten dreams. As she worked, the smell of her cooking began to spread again. It wasn't the sharp, heavy scent of fine dining. It was gentler, comforting, like Sunday lunches, like family gatherings, like stories shared over old wooden tables. The aroma touched everyone differently. Some smiled without realizing it. Others closed their eyes for a second, lost in a memory they couldn't name. Marco stepped closer, his curiosity getting the better of him. "What are you making this time?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Anna looked up and smiled. "Just something simple again. My mother used to call it comfort stew." "Comfort stew?" Marco repeated, half amused. "That's not exactly restaurant material." Anna just smiled again and went back to stirring. "Maybe not. But people remember food that comforts them, not just food that looks pretty." Marco didn't reply, but her words hit deeper than she could have known. He thought about all the times he'd chased stars, awards, and fancy reviews, and how somewhere along the way food had become more about show than soul. Anna kept cooking quietly. She moved around the kitchen with respect, not claiming space but somehow owning it all the same. She washed her utensils after every step, wiped the counter clean, and kept everything in perfect order. Even Marco's assistant started following her rhythm, unconsciously slowing down, becoming more careful. The restaurant, for the first time in years, felt peaceful. Marco finally gave in and walked closer. He stood beside her and watched her add a pinch of salt to the pot. "You didn't even taste it," he said. "I don't need to," Anna replied softly. "I can smell it." He blinked, surprised. That kind of confidence was rare, but it wasn't arrogance. It was pure experience. The stew simmered quietly, releasing a fragrance that wrapped the whole kitchen like a warm blanket. Marco leaned forward and took a small spoonful to taste. The moment it touched his tongue, he froze again. It was incredible. Not because it was complex. In fact, it was the opposite. It was simple, yet every flavor was perfectly balanced. It tasted like care, like patience. It was food that told a story. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Anna could see the change in his eyes. When the dish was ready, Marco asked her to serve a small portion to the staff. "Let's see what the others think," he said. Anna nodded and plated the stew neatly. The other cooks hesitated at first, but then took a spoonful each. One by one, their faces softened. The loud, competitive chefs who rarely complimented anyone looked genuinely moved. "It tastes like my grandmother's kitchen," one of them whispered. "It feels like home," said another. Even Leo smiled widely. "Chef, this is the kind of food that makes people happy." Marco didn't answer. He just looked at Anna again. This woman who had walked into his restaurant only a few hours ago asking for a waitress job, now standing in his kitchen like she belonged there. Anna wiped her hands on her apron and said quietly, "Sometimes people just need something real." Marco nodded slowly, his usual pride fading into thoughtfulness. He finally said, "You're right. Maybe we've all forgotten what real tastes like." There was a moment of silence between them, not awkward but meaningful. Two cooks from completely different worlds, standing side by side, connected by the same truth. Outside, the dining room buzzed with laughter and chatter as new dishes went out. But in the kitchen, something more important was happening. Respect was being born. Marco didn't admit it aloud, but he had started learning again that day. From a woman who had lost everything, yet carried more flavor in her heart than most chefs did in their careers. Anna continued to cook quietly, humming again, her eyes soft with memories. The kitchen had become alive, not with noise, but with heart. And though no one said it out loud, everyone felt it. The simple woman had brought warmth back into the cold, shining kitchen of Le Soleil. Time seemed to slow down in the kitchen of Le Soleil. The clock on the wall ticked softly, but no one noticed. The world outside the restaurant went on, cars passing, people talking, the city humming. Yet inside, something extraordinary was taking shape. Anna stood quietly by the counter, her sleeves rolled up, her apron lightly dusted with flour and tiny drops of sauce. Her face glowed with a calm focus, the kind that came from doing something you truly love. Around her, the kitchen team had fallen silent, watching every move she made. The teasing from earlier was long gone. In its place was quiet respect and a little awe. The meal she was preparing wasn't fancy. There were no complicated sauces, no gold flakes or exotic ingredients. Just fresh vegetables, tender pieces of meat, herbs, and spices, the kind of ingredients anyone could find in their home kitchen. But the way she treated them was different. She touched every piece with care, tasting, adjusting, stirring, as though each ingredient had a story to tell. Chef Marco stood nearby, pretending to supervise, but really, he was studying her. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen someone cook like this, or with such peace, such love. His chefs usually worked like machines, chasing perfection through pressure. But Anna's perfection came from patience. She began plating the meal. Each movement was deliberate, graceful, like a painter adding the final strokes to a masterpiece. She laid the vegetables in a soft curve, drizzled the sauce carefully, and placed a small garnish of fresh parsley on top. It looked beautiful, not like a five-star restaurant dish, but like something your grandmother would make for you on a rainy day, served with warmth and memory. The air smelled incredible. Even the customers in the dining area started turning their heads, wondering what new dish the kitchen had created. Marco finally spoke. "Is it ready?" Anna nodded. "Yes, chef." He stepped forward slowly. The rest of the staff gathered behind him, forming a quiet circle. Marco looked down at the plate. For a moment, he didn't say anything. The dish didn't look like the kind of thing that would win awards. It was too simple. But somehow, it drew him in. The colors were soft and natural. The sauce glistened. Under the light and the aroma, it was like stepping into a memory. He picked up a fork and knife, cutting a small piece. Everyone watched as he took the first bite. Silence. Then something changed in his eyes, the same way it had earlier when he first tasted her cooking. His expression softened, almost painfully so. It wasn't just good. It was emotional. The flavors were rich yet balanced, sweet, earthy, with a hint of spice that lingered gently. It was the kind of food that didn't just fill your stomach, it filled your heart. He put the fork down slowly. "This," he said quietly, "tastes like home." No one dared to speak. Anna smiled softly, her eyes glistening just a little. "That's exactly what it's supposed to taste like," she said. Marco leaned against the counter, lost in thought. "You know," he said after a pause, "I've spent my life trying to make dishes that impress people. But this," he pointed at the plate, "this reminds them who they are." The cooks around him nodded silently. They had all felt Chorisan, that strange pull of emotion from something as simple as a spoonful of stew. "Serve it," Marco said finally. The staff looked at him surprised. "Serve it, chef?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Let's see what the customers think." Leo, the waiter, quickly took the plate and carried it out to a table where two regular customers sat. They had no idea they were about to taste something special. When they took their first bite, their faces changed instantly. The man smiled, eyes closing for a moment. "This tastes like something my mother used to make," he said softly. His wife nodded, smiling through teary eyes. "It feels familiar." When Leo returned to the kitchen and told everyone what they said, the whole team felt a quiet wave of pride. Not the kind that comes from fancy compliments, but the kind that warms you deep inside. Anna didn't boast. She just wiped her hands and whispered, "I'm glad they liked it." Marco walked over to her and said, "You didn't just cook a meal today, Anna. You reminded us why we started cooking in the first place." She looked up at him, her eyes kind but humble. "Cooking isn't about impressing people, chef," she said softly. "It's about making them feel cared for. When you cook with heart, people can taste it." Marco nodded slowly. He had no clever comeback, no chef's pride to hide behind. For the first time in years, someone had managed to silence him, not with words but with truth. As Anna cleaned up her station, the other chefs approached her, one by one, thanking her quietly or complimenting her dish. Some of them even asked her for tips. She laughed shyly, not used to the attention. The restaurant felt different that afternoon. The air was lighter, the mood warmer. It was as if Anna had opened a window and let the sunlight in, and as Marco watched her from across the kitchen, he realized something he hadn't felt in a long time: inspiration. The simple woman he had teased that morning had reminded the great chef Marco that real cooking wasn't about fame or money. It was about connection, the invisible thread between food and heart. And though the day wasn't over yet, Marco knew one thing for sure: Le Soleil would never be the same again. The restaurant was full now. Soft music floated in the background, plates clinked gently, and conversations filled the air. Yet somewhere between the laughter and chatter there was a quiet buzz, the kind that happens when something special is about to be discovered. At table 7 sat a group of well-dressed diners, regular customers known for their high expectations. They had no idea that the meal about to be placed before them wasn't designed by Chef Marco himself, but by a woman who had walked into the restaurant just hours ago, hoping only for a waitress job. Leo, the young waiter, carried the plate carefully, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel the importance of this moment. As he approached the table, he smiled and said, "Today's special, a new creation from our kitchen." The diners nodded politely, more curious than excited. They didn't know they were about to taste something unforgettable. When the first diner picked up his fork, Marco stood behind the kitchen window watching closely. Anna stood beside him, quiet and humble, her fingers nervously twisting her apron. She wasn't scared, just unsure. It had been years since someone outside her little world had tasted her food. The diner took the first bite. Everything stopped for a moment. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just closed his eyes and let the flavor settle. The warmth of the herbs, the softness of the vegetables, the way the sauce wrapped everything together like a comforting hug. Then slowly he smiled. "This," he said softly, "is beautiful." His wife took a bite too, and she put her fork down immediately, her eyes misty. "It tastes like my mother's cooking," she whispered. "I haven't tasted anything like this in years." Around the table, everyone began to eat, and soon the soft clinking of cutlery was joined by quiet sighs of satisfaction. There were no fancy words, no exaggerated compliments, just genuine emotion. Back in the kitchen, Marco was frozen in place. His eyes were on the diners, but his thoughts were somewhere else, back to his own childhood. He remembered his mother's small kitchen, the smell of tomato sauce simmering on Sundays, the way she'd hum while stirring. He hadn't thought about it in years, but now one bite of Anna's dish had brought it all flooding back. He turned slowly to look at her. She was watching too, her expression gentle but uncertain. "They like it," she said quietly. "They love it," Marco corrected her, his voice softer than usual. A small smile curved on Anna's lips, but there was no pride in it, just peace. "I'm glad," she whispered. "Food should make people feel something." Marco nodded, unable to find the right words. He had spent his whole career chasing Michelin stars, critic reviews, and fancy awards. But in that moment he realized none of those things had ever made people feel the way this one simple dish did. The news spread quickly through the restaurant. Other customers began asking about the new meal. "What's that amazing smell?" one woman asked her waiter. "Can we try it too?" Soon more plates went out, and the same reaction followed every time: surprise, emotion, warmth. People weren't just eating, they were remembering. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere had completely changed. The same chefs who had laughed at Anna that morning were now watching her with quiet admiration. One of them finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Ma'am, how did you do that? It's so simple, but it feels like magic." Anna smiled shyly. "It's not magic," she said softly. "It's just love and patience. I cook the way my mother did. She used to say, 'If you rush food, it forgets to smile.'" Her words made the staff chuckle lightly. But the truth in them stayed. As the evening went on, the kitchen worked together differently, calmer, gentler. No shouting, no panic, no rushing. Even Marco seemed changed. He moved slower, more thoughtful, tasting his sauces instead of barking orders. It was as if Anna's quiet energy had spread through the whole room, softening everything it touched. Later, when the restaurant began to close, Marco walked out to the dining room. The guests were leaving happy, many of them asking for the special dish again. Some even asked to meet the person who cooked it. But Anna politely stayed in the kitchen, cleaning her station. Marco found her there, still wiping down the counter, humming softly. He stood beside her for a moment, then said quietly, "You know, I started this restaurant to make art out of food. But today you reminded me that food isn't art, it's heart." Anna stopped and looked at him.
Maybe it's both, she said gently.
"But the heart has to come first." He smiled at that, a real smile, not the proud smirk his staff usually saw. "You've changed this place in one day," he said. "I didn't mean to," she replied. "I just wanted to do what I love." Marco nodded. And that's exactly why it worked. Outside, the last customers left, thanking the staff with happy faces. The lights in Le Soleil dimmed one by one, but inside the kitchen something bright remained, a sense of warmth, humility, and hope. As Anna hung up her apron and turned to leave, Marco called after her. "Anna," he said, "tomorrow, would you come back?" She hesitated, surprised. "You mean, as a waitress?" He shook his head slowly, a smile forming again. "No," he said, "as a cook." For a moment she just stared at him, speechless. Then her eyes filled with tears, the kind that come not from sadness but from a dream you thought was lost suddenly returning to you. "Thank you, chef," she whispered. "No," Marco said softly, "thank you." And as she walked out into the cool night air, the stars above the city glimmered faintly, as if the world itself had smiled back at her. The next morning, the sun rose softly over the city, painting the rooftops in gold. The streets were waking up, vendors setting up their carts, buses rumbling by, and the smell of fresh bread floating through the air. Inside Le Soleil, the restaurant was quiet, almost peaceful. The chaos of yesterday had melted into a calm, thoughtful silence. Chef Marco arrived earlier than usual. He walked through the kitchen slowly, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. Everything was neat and in place, but something felt different. The air seemed lighter, warmer, as if the space itself had changed overnight. He stood for a moment, staring at the empty counter where Anna had worked the day before. He could still remember how she moved, slow, steady, and full of purpose. It wasn't something he could explain, but she had left a mark. Her presence still lingered like the faint scent of herbs that refused to fade. A few minutes later, Anna walked in, holding her small handbag and wearing the same plain blue dress. Her hair was tied neatly and her eyes carried that same gentle calmness. "Good morning, chef," she said softly. "Good morning," Marco replied, his tone unusually kind. "You came. You asked me to," she said with a little smile. He chuckled quietly. "Yes, I did. And I'm glad you did." The staff started trickling in, surprised but happy to see her again. Leo, the young waiter, waved cheerfully. "Morning, Miss Anna. Everyone's been talking about your dish." Anna blushed.
Oh, really?
"I hope it wasn't too much trouble." "Trouble?" Leo laughed. "Half the customers asked for it again today." Marco crossed his arms but smiled proudly. "Seems like you've started a trend, Anna." She laughed softly, still humble. "It was just one meal, chef," but Marco shook his head. "It was more than that. You reminded us what food is supposed to feel like." The morning went on quietly. Orders began coming in and the kitchen buzzed back to life, but this time it felt different. The shouting was gone, replaced by calm communication. Even the most stubborn cooks found themselves smiling as they worked. Anna helped wherever she could, chopping, stirring, seasoning, not as a guest but as one of them. Hours passed and lunchtime arrived. The restaurant filled up fast, word spreading quickly about the new dish that made people feel at home. Marco watched proudly as Anna's recipe went out again and again, and each time, customers reacted the same way. Smiles, sighs, and memories flooding back. But amidst all the happiness, Marco's curiosity grew stronger. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the quiet strength behind her gentle face. Who was she really? How could someone who had walked in from the street cook with such soul, such truth? During a short break, he found her sitting by the back door, sipping tea. The sunlight streamed through the glass, turning her simple figure into something almost angelic. He sat across from her. "Anna," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She looked up, curious. "Yes, chef. Yesterday, when you cooked that meal, it wasn't just talent. There was something deeper. You said it was your mother's recipe, but that can't be the whole story. You cook like someone who's lived through something. Anna stayed silent for a long moment. Then she smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "You're right," she said softly. "I used to own a small diner with my husband. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We cooked simple meals for people who didn't have much. Truck drivers, students, workers. They loved it because it felt like home." Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "After he passed away, everything fell apart. I couldn't manage it alone. I lost the diner, and with it I lost a part of myself. For years I thought I'd never cook again. I took small jobs and cleaning, helping in kitchens, but I never touched the stove." She looked down at her cup, her hands gently trembling. "Yesterday when you told me to cook, I almost said no. But something inside me whispered, 'Try once more.'" Marco didn't interrupt. He could feel the emotion in her words, the kind of honesty that came from real pain. Anna smiled faintly through her tears. "When I started cooking here yesterday, it felt like I found myself again. Like the person I thought I'd lost had finally come home." The kitchen noise faded in the background as her words hung in the air. Marco didn't know what to say. He had met thousands of chefs, trained, talented, ambitious, but none had ever spoken about food the way she did. After a long silence, he said quietly, "You didn't just find yourself, Anna. You reminded all of us who we were too." She looked up. Surprised, he continued, "I used to think cooking was about skill and fame, but watching you, I realized it's about love. The love we put in, the love people taste. Somewhere along the way I forgot that." Anna's eyes glistened again. "Then maybe we both found something yesterday, chef." He nodded, smiling warmly. "Maybe we did." The two sat there quietly, letting the silence speak for them. It wasn't awkward. It was full of peace, like two souls who finally understood each other. As the day went on, Le Soleil wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was alive with warmth. Customers laughed louder, the staff worked happier, and for the first time in years, Chef Marco's kitchen felt like home. And at the heart of it all was Anna, the simple woman whose story had become a lesson, a reminder and a quiet miracle. She had lost everything once, but now with one unexpected chance and one heartfelt meal, she had found something far greater than a job. She had found herself again. The sun was beginning to set over the city, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The golden light spilled through the restaurant windows, wrapping everything in warmth. Inside Le Soleil, the dinner service was just beginning, and the energy felt different, alive, but peaceful. The laughter of customers filled the air, mixed with the soothing clatter of plates and the quiet hum of conversation. But in the kitchen, something even more magical was happening. Anna was standing at her station again, calm and steady as ever. She wore her apron with pride now, not as a stranger borrowing space, but as someone who truly belonged there. The chefs worked beside her, not above her, not around her, with her. They didn't see a simple woman anymore. They saw a cook, an equal, and a teacher in disguise. Chef Marco walked around the kitchen, but he wasn't barking orders like before. Instead, he offered gentle advice, a rare smile, even a soft laugh. The change in him was visible to everyone, as if the flame that had once burned too fiercely in him had now softened into a steady, warm glow. As plates went out, customers kept asking for Anna's dish. They called it the comfort plate. Some said it reminded them of childhood. Others said it felt like healing. Word spread quickly through town, not about a new recipe, but about a restaurant where food felt like love. By the end of the night, the last customers left happy and full, leaving behind smiles, empty plates, and glowing reviews. Marco gathered the team together, just as he always did. But this time there was no shouting, no scolding, only pride. "Well done, everyone," he said. His gaze landed on Anna. "Especially you." Anna looked down shyly. "Thank you, chef. I just did my part." Marco shook his head. "You did more than that. You changed this place." The staff nodded in agreement. One of the younger chefs spoke up. "Chef's right. It doesn't even feel like the same kitchen anymore." Anna smiled softly. "Maybe it's because we all cooked with heart today." They all laughed quietly, but her words stayed in the air like a truth everyone already knew. After the team left, only Marco and Anna remained. The kitchen was dim now with the warm light from the stove flickering gently. The smell of herbs still lingered mixed with the scent of baked bread and memories. Marco leaned against the counter, thoughtful. "You know, Anna," he began, "when you walked in that day, I thought you didn't belong here. I thought you were too simple for this world of polished chefs and perfect plates." Anna smiled faintly. "Maybe I was, but sometimes simple things fit exactly where they're needed." He nodded slowly, his eyes kind. "You're right. You reminded me that food isn't meant to be shown off. It's meant to be shared. Somewhere along the way, I lost that." Anna looked at him with gentle understanding. "We all forget sometimes, but the kitchen, it forgives us. It always welcomes us back." Marco chuckled softly, a little moved by her words. "You talk about cooking like it's a person." She laughed. "Maybe it is, at least to people like us." There was a long pause, comfortable and warm. Then Marco reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. "I was going to wait," he said, handing it to her. "But I think you deserve to see this now." Anna looked at him, surprised, then opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded contract. Her eyes widened as she read the first line. "Employment agreement. Head homestyle chef, Le Soleil." Her breath caught. "Chef, what is this?" Marco smiled proudly. "You said you wanted to start over, so here's your start. From today, you're part of this restaurant. Officially. Not as a helper, not as a waitress, as a chef." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she looked at the paper again. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Marco said softly. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. 100 times, yes." Marco grinned. "Then welcome home, Anna." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "Home, that's a nice word." They stood there in the quiet kitchen, the sounds of the city fading outside, the world slowing down around them. It was one of those rare moments when life felt perfectly complete, like all the broken pieces had finally found their place. As Anna hung up her apron that night, she paused and looked around the kitchen one more time. The counters gleamed, the pots sparkled, and the air was thick with the scent of hope. She smiled, whispering to herself, "Maybe dreams don't die. They just wait for the right time to wake up." Outside, the street shimmered under the soft glow of streetlights. Anna stepped out into the cool evening breeze, her heart full, her spirit light. Behind her, through the window, Le Soleil glowed softly. Not just a restaurant anymore, but a place of second chances, love, and rediscovery. And somewhere deep inside, both Chef Marco and Anna knew that their meeting hadn't been an accident. It was destiny, a simple act of kindness wrapped in a joke that had turned into a miracle. That night, as Anna walked home under the golden lights of the city, she smiled to herself. What had started as a joke had ended as a story no one would ever forget.